Graduates, please rise. Everyone, please rise for the singing of our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight
Thank you, Aaron. Please be seated, and good afternoon. To all those receiving degrees, their families and friends, and our faculty, staff, and students, on behalf of Virginia Tech, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Spring 2025 graduate commencement exercises in its 154th year of our university. I want to thank our governing body, the Virginia Tech Board of Visitors, led by Rector Edward Bain, for their leadership, support, and deep commitment to the university. Joining us today are Rachel Miles, faculty representative to the board, Janice Austin, AP faculty representative, and William Poland, our graduate student representative. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing the university's Board of Visitors and our faculty and student representatives. Throughout this ceremony, we recognize our graduates' significant achievements and celebrate their talents, skills, and hard work. It's also important to note that these students would not have achieved their goals without the teaching, guidance, and mentorship of Virginia Tech's outstanding faculty. I would now like the faculty to please stand and be recognized. The supporting cast of family, friends, and community members behind each graduate student is also crucial and deserves recognition. With the parents, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, partners, spouses, and children, please stand up so we can congratulate you as well. Graduate students are an important part of the university's research, teaching, and engagement mission as they pursue their degrees in Blacksburg, as well as Virginia Tech campuses across the Commonwealth and online. During the winter and spring semesters, 1,950 students earn advanced degrees and certificates from 89 master's and 70 doctoral programs in 8 colleges. There are approximately 236 doctoral graduates here today. It's now my pleasure to present Virginia Tech's Executive Vice President and Provost, Dr. Cyril Clark. And while he's coming up here, I'd like to share that this morning we announced that Cyril will be stepping down and returning to the faculty at the end of this calendar year after serving 8 years as Provost and making significant and lasting contributions to the success of our university. Would you please join me in recognizing and thanking Provost Clark for his dedicated service to Virginia Tech.
President Sands, thank you. It has been a privilege for me to serve as Virginia Tech's Provost for the last 8 years, and for several years as Dean of the College of Veterinary Medicine before that. And that task has greatly benefited from the tremendous support that I've received from President Sands, my administrative colleagues, as well as the faculty, the staff, and the students. And I'm immensely grateful. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, now let's get back to the business. The faculty, the deans, and academic administration at Virginia Tech are deeply proud of our students' achievements and are committed to supporting each of you throughout your journey to graduation. On behalf of the entire academic community, I congratulate you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you in this celebration of this milestone event. As Hokies, you will carry forward the spirit of Ut Prosim into the next phase of your lives. You have the opportunity, and I even say the responsibility, to use your skills and talents to positively impact our society, both locally and globally, and to advance the welfare of people around the world through education, knowledge, and advocacy. When Hokies combine capacity with compassion, we create a global community of people who can improve the world around us for everyone. When we combine the power of technology with talent, we create access to resources and relationships that bring us closer together. And when we combine education with empathy, we build systems and structures that can feed, clothe, cure, educate, and enlighten communities around the world today and for generations to come. Once again, congratulations on this momentous achievement, and I wish you the very best of luck in your future personal as well as professional endeavors. And at this time, I would like to introduce the Dean of the Graduate School, Dr. Amy Surprenant. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Clark. This spring, we've invited 2 doctoral students to share some comments about their experiences. Each student will share a story in a very short period of time, and I know you will enjoy their reflections. Jiayuan Dong, who will receive a PhD in Industrial and Systems Engineering, will be our first speaker, followed by Emily Terrell, who will receive a PhD in Translational Biology, Medicine, and Health. Jiayuan?
You're probably familiar with this. Your background is impressive, but we regret to inform you. I received many rejections throughout my graduate life. Fellowships that I didn't get, journal papers torn apart by reviewer 2, and jobs I didn't land. Rejection, rejection, another rejection. Rejection emails started to feel like personal attacks. Am I really not worth it? One day, after being turned down by another rejection, I came home to find a box of snacks. Those were from my dad. I FaceTimed him, annoying, questioning his weird choice of traditional Chinese snacks. My dad just smiled and said, I just wanted to cheer my PhD daughter up. Then I noticed buried in the box were my favorite childhood snacks. That moment helped me to remind myself something bigger. The people I have and the strength within me. That's when I started taking smaller steps forward instead of drowning myself in doubt. The rejections won't stop, but they no longer define me. Instead, they refine me. So to every graduate student who's ever felt defeated, rejection doesn't ruin your story, it edits the plot. Lastly, I want to share something my dad always tells me when I'm in doubt. We are all whipped cream because cream will always rise to the top. Thank you.
If you had asked me a few years ago where I'd be today, I never would have said graduate school. In fact, when I was born, weighing just 1 pound, 12 ounces, my future was anything but certain. The odds were against me, and it was unclear if I'd even survive. Growing up, that experience inspired me to follow a more traditional path, like becoming a physician, to give back to the healthcare system that saved my life. I never imagined that research could be just as impactful or that it would become my passion. This has been a very rewarding and yet surprisingly challenging experience. Each of us has faced our own obstacles. Long nights writing your dissertation, research and experimental setbacks, imposter syndrome, but we kept showing up. We've learned to navigate uncertainty, to persist when things felt impossible, and to believe in ourselves even when it was hard. This moment isn't just about degrees or diplomas, it's about resilience. It's about knowing that we now have the skills to face whatever comes next. no matter how unexpected. So today, not only take pride in where you are, but also in how far you've come. Congratulations, class of 2025.
Thank you so much, Gia and Emily. I'd like to offer my sincere congratulations to all of the students who have fulfilled the requirements for a doctoral and interdisciplinary master's degrees at Virginia Tech. Many of our graduates have won fellowships or scholarships, awards and accolades, special recognitions throughout their programs, and have served the university in countless ways. Congratulations on your accomplishments, and thank you for being a part of the Virginia Tech graduate community. Please join me in a round of applause for all of our outstanding graduates. My first thought is you made it. You made it through hardship, you made it through sorrow, you made it through many difficult circumstances. At the same time, you've thrived in your programs and have reached a high standard of excellence. I'm in awe of your strength and resilience. A graduate degree is both an incredible and impossible achievement that only a tiny fraction of individuals realize. It takes a powerful combination of intellectual aptitude, resilience, diligence, and support to complete. Now that you are finished, I hope you can take the time to reflect on and be proud of your hard work that you have put into obtaining this degree. I know we are proud of you, as are your supervisors, your mentors, your family, and your friends. All of the hard work you put in matters. It means something. My biggest piece of advice for you is to determine what's important in your life and always strive to keep that in focus. It may be family, friends, or it may be a driving passion to study the stars, write a book, or even run in a marathon. That important thing might change over time, so make sure you examine your priorities and continue to focus on those things that are important to you. As scientists, engineers, humanists, social scientists, artists, architects, agriculturalists, and business and more, I want to remind you of the incredible power that you hold. You are the builders of the future, the visionaries who will shape the world in which we live. Whether you're designing innovative technologies, creating works of art, tackling complex problems, or leading teams, your skills have the potential to change lives and make a meaningful impact on society. With this power comes great responsibility. As VT alums, we expect you to aspire to prioritize integrity, ethics, and the greater good in everything you do. Your decisions will not only affect the bottom line, but also the lives of countless individuals. Embrace this responsibility with humility and a commitment to excellence. As you continue your journey, never forget the importance of lifelong learning. Your fields are constantly evolving, and staying ahead requires continuous growth and adaptation. Embrace new challenges, seek out opportunities for growth, and never shy away from pushing the boundaries to what's possible. Furthermore, remember the values of collaboration and diversity of viewpoints. We all see the world in a slightly different way, and so in order to build an accurate model of the world, we need multiple viewpoints. Some of the most groundbreaking innovations arise from the combination of diverse perspectives and expertise. Foster an inclusive environment where everyone's voice is heard and respected, and where collaboration flourishes. Finally, don't forget to take care of yourselves along the way. Your careers can be demanding, but remember to prioritize your physical and mental well-being. Cultivate a balance between your professional ambitions and personal fulfillment, and don't hesitate to seek support when needed. As you leave Virginia Tech and step into the world, know that you are well equipped to tackle whatever challenges that come your way. Embrace the opportunities that lie ahead, stay true to your values, and never stop striving for excellence. Congratulations once again, and may your futures be filled with boundless opportunities and remarkable achievements. Go forth and create a brighter tomorrow for us all.
We will now begin the conferral of doctoral degrees. The presentation of the doctoral degree includes a very old and special tradition. The doctoral candidate and the student's major advisor, the advisor who most mentored and supervised the student's research, walk together to the stage where the advisor places the hood over the head of the graduate. By hooding the graduate, the faculty member symbolically welcomes the graduate as a professional colleague, and the professional relationship and friendship often continues throughout the graduate's and the mentor's lives.
Will all the candidates for the Doctor of Philosophy and Doctor of Education degrees please rise? President Sands, I have the honor to present the candidates for the Doctor of Philosophy and Doctor of Education degrees.
With the power vested in me by the Board of Visitors and the Commonwealth of Virginia, and upon recommendation of the faculty, I confer upon you the Doctor of Philosophy and Doctor of Education degrees, to which you are entitled with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertaining thereto.
Please be seated. Will the marshals please escort the candidates for the doctoral degrees and their major professors to the stage for the hooding ceremony. Dr. Joseph Merola will read the names of the doctoral recipients and the hooding professors.
Receiving the Doctor of Philosophy from the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences in Agricultural and Extension Education, Mohammed Juma Mwinyi, hooded by Professor Rick Rudd. Dixon Ouma Otieno, hooded by Professors Thomas Archibald and Tom Thompson. Anuradha Sen, hooded by Professor Thomas Archibald. Ellie Madeline Travis, hooded by Professor Thomas Archibald. Nicholas Uwatanze, hooded by Professor Curtis Friedel. In Animal and Poultry Sciences, Yi Un Bei, hooded by Professor Timothy Jerome. Sally Ann Dickinson, hooded by Professor Erica Feuerbacher. Jessica Ann Keene, hooded by Professor Alan Ely. Usman Suleiman, hooded by Professors Mark Klein and Elizabeth Gilbert. Ryan Wright, hooded by Professor Robin White. In animal sciences, dairy, Leticia Mara Campos, hooded by Professor Mark Hannigan. Gabriela Perez Hernandez, hooded by Professor Christy Daniels. In biochemistry, Brittany Hart, hooded by Professor Pablo Sobrado. Melanie Christine Hempel, hooded by Professor Pablo Sobrado. Noah Scott Lyons, hooded by Professor Pablo Sobrado. In crop, soil, and environmental sciences, Prashasti Agarwal, hooded by Professors Brian Badgley and Jacob Barney. Unius Arenatwe, hooded by Professor Hunter Frame. Patrick William Baywick, hooded by Professor Bo Zhang. Jordan Taylor Kosha, hooded by Professor Leighton Reed. Elizabeth Boadicea Fletcher, hooded by Professors Bo Zhang and Ozzy Abai. In entomology, Chris Angel Lopez, hooded by Professor Jonathan Auguste and John Muller. And Quentin. Luisa Fernanda Vasquez Valverde, hooded by Professor Tim Kring. In food science and technology, Yilin Li, hooded by Professor Haibo Huang. Kezia Virelia To, hooded by Professor Jacob Lon. Da Jun Yu, hooded by Professor Haibo Huang. In human nutrition, foods, and exercise, Matthew Henry Brizendine, hooded by Professor Joshua Drake. Bailey Thomas Capra, hooded by Professor Brenda Davey. Maria Nicole D'Annunzio, hooded by Professor Sarah Misyak. Jake Colton Reynolds, hooded by Professor Brenda Davey. In plant pathology, physiology, and weed science, Baker Aljawasim, hooded by Professor Sean Askew. Brett Corbett, hooded by Professor Sean Askew. Navdeep Godara, hooded by Professor Sean Askew. Travis Leon Roberson, hooded by Professor David McCall. Timothy Joseph Shively, hooded by Professors Jacob Barney and Scott Salam. Matthew Aaron Tucker, hooded by Professors David McCall and John Eisenbach. From the College of Architecture and Urban Studies in Architecture and Design Research, Tamer Saleh Al-Radide, hooded by Professor James Jones. Tian Ming Zhao, hooded by Professor Umberto Rodriguez Camioni. From the Pamplin College of Business in Accounting, James Elliott Mearsman, hooded by Professors Andrew Acito and Rob Davidson. In Business Information Technology, Ana Carolina Goncalves Reyes, hooded by Professor Onur Sarif. In Management, Ryan Musselman, hooded by Professor Bill Becker. In Marketing, Guy Young Park, hooded by Professor Rajesh Bagchi. Angela Yee, hooded by Professor Deepankar Chakravarti. From the College of Engineering, a husband and wife team. He in electrical engineering, she in mechanical engineering. And Arwa. Ashwarul Haq Sifat, hooded by Professor Bill Huckle, and Avelina Rahman, hooded by Professor Danesh Tafti. and Arwa must wait for her hood for a number of years. In aerospace engineering, Bruce Lee Barber, hooded by Professors Kevin Schroeder and Jonathan Black. Matthew Thomas Boyda, hooded by Professor Todd Lowe. Shishir Damani, hooded by Professor William Davenport. Joe El Gussain, hooded by Professor Olivier Coutier Delgosha. Kenneth Christopher Gann, hooded by Professor Craig Woolsey. Neslihan Genchkal, hooded by Professor Gary Seidel. Jeremy Winston Hopwood, hooded by Professor Craig Woolsey. Shafkut Tanvirul Islam, hooded by Professor Kevin Wang. Wei Che Lin, hooded by Professor Gregory Young. Nazmua Sakib, hooded by Professor Craig Woolsey. Varahini Sanmugadas, hooded by Professor Rakesh Kapanya. Connor Benjamin Seagal, hooded by Professors Kevin Schroeder and Jonathan Black. Gustavo Ventura Gargioni, hooded by Professors Jonathan Black and Kevin Shinpaw. In biological systems engineering, Hoda Mohsen Youssef Hamad, hooded by Professor Anna Duraj Tat. Catherine Marie Wardinsky, hooded by Professor Durrell Scott. In biomedical engineering, Rafi Nazir Ahmad, hooded by Professor Jennifer Munson. Sarah Luella Hall, hooded by Professor Eli Vlasavljevic. Sparsh Jane, hooded by Professor Miguel Perez. Alexia Stetinius, hooded by Professor Eli Vlasavljevic. Aileen Caridad Suarez, hooded by Professor Rafaela De Vita. In chemical engineering, Justin Anderson, hooded by Professor Michael Bortner. Zachary Wang Ben-Mamoun, hooded by Professor Joseph Falkenham. Thomas Craig Kennard, hooded by Professor Stephen Wren. Xuan Dong Nguyen, hooded by Professor Stephen Wren. Shakeen Mariana Ramirez Isunza, hooded by Professor Stephen Martin. In civil engineering, Jennifer Ann Albright, hooded by Professor Yanis Koutramanos. Ahmed El-Sayed Areda, hooded by Professors Hesham Raka and Hoda El-Dardiri. Sung Yun Cho, hooded by Professor Alexander Brand. Xinwei Huang, hooded by Professor Hossein Forotan. Mohammed Khalid, hooded by Professor Abiola Akanmu. Lauren Marie Krause, hooded by Professor Megan Rippey. Mustafa Ebrahimi Mehman, hooded by Professor Farouk Jazizadeh. Namrata Shanmukh Panji, hooded by Professor Gabriel Isaacman Van Wertz. Mohammed Abu Bakar Siddiq, hooded by Professor Landon Marston. Alan Glenn Smith, hooded by Professor Rodrigo Sarlo. Bilin Tong, hooded by Professor Gerardo Flinch. Ernesto Urbaez Perez, hooded by Professor Gerardo Flinch. Zhu Wang, hooded by Professor Antonio Trani. Chiu Yun Yu, hooded by Professor Landon Marston. In computer engineering, Si Chen, hooded by Professor Rushi Jia. Benaz Rezvani, hooded by Professors Leila Nazandali and Harpreet Dhillon. In computer science and applications, Sheikh Murad Hassan Anik, hooded by Professor Jinghua Gao. Vasant Reddy Badam, hooded by Professor Hoda Eldardiri. Bipasha Banerjee, hooded by Professor Edward Fox. Sekiba Davari Najafabadi, hooded by Professor Doug Bowman. Miles Eugene France, hooded by Professor Daphne Yao. Zhao Yang, hooded by Professor Bill Huckle. Rifat Sabir Mansour and Maya, hooded by Professors Cliff Schaefer and Stephen Edwards. Mohammed Abdullah Al-Maruf, hooded by Professor Anuj Karpatne. Leonardo Pavanato Soares, hooded by Professor Doug Bowman. Ramatullah Roach, hooded by Professor William Huckle. Raid. Oh no, I got another one. Yeah, I know. I'm all mixed up now. Who is that? I don't know who that is, though. People got out of order. Okay. Bowen Shen, hooded by Professor Daphne Yao. Wen Jia Song, hooded by Professor Daphne Yao. What was her name again? Afrina Tabassum and Raid, hooded by Professor Hoda Eldardiri. In electrical engineering, Jennifer Apia Kubi, hooded by Professor Virgilio Centeno. Morteza Banagar, hooded by Professor Harpreet Dhillon. Mark Anthony Carney Jr., hooded by Professor Christina DiMarino. Amrita Hakraborty, hooded by Professor Marius Orlowski. Rutwik Joshi, hooded by Professor Mantu Pudet. Imtiaz Khan, hooded by Professor Virgilio Centeno. Bo Yu Lu, hooded by Professor Cristina Di Marino. Natasha Sahani, hooded by Professor Virgilio Centeno. Ashwin Venkataramanan, hooded by Professor Virgilio Centeno. In engineering education, Isol Anakuk, hooded by Professor Andrew Katz. Yi Kao, hooded by Professor Jenny Case. Andrew L. Schumann, hooded by Professor David Knight. Hamdareza Taimuri, hooded by Professor David Knight. Margaret Webb, hooded by Professor Marie Peretti. In engineering mechanics, Krishnashish Chatterjee, hooded by Professor Ann Staples. Alexander Nicholas Imhoff, hooded by Professor Gary Seidel. Albert Joseph Jarvis, hooded by Professor Shane Ross. In environmental design and planning, Sharon Bradley, hooded by Professor Min Tai Kim. Ashit Harod, hooded by Professor Walid Tabet. Simin Kianpur Rad, hooded by Professors Philip Agee and Abiola Akanmu. In industrial and systems engineering, Wilmer Alvarado, hooded by Professor Maury Nussbaum. Mohammed Hassan Ba'awum, hooded by Professor Maury Nussbaum. Abranil Dam, hooded by Professor Myung Hoon John. Jia Wan Dong, hooded by Professor Myung Hoon Jeon. Anli Du Pries, hooded by Professor Peter Baling. Mohammed Shafiqul Islam, hooded by Professor Sol Lim. Ha Jun Moon, hooded by Professor Myung Hun Jeon. Wallace Martin Morris, hooded by Professor Maury Nussbaum. Cassidy Ray Nelson, hooded by Professor Joseph Gabbard. Jacqueline Gabriela Noyola, hooded by Professor Miguel Perez. Z. Kelsey Ann Quinn, hooded by Professor Joseph Gabbard. Man Hua Wang, hooded by Professor Myung Hoon Jeon. In mechanical engineering, Zakia Ahmed and Zain, hooded by Professor Craig Woolsey. Layla Amunzadeh, hooded by Professor Steve Southward. Bharat Balasubramanya, hooded by Professor Steve Southward. Srikar Banajiri, hooded by Professor Joseph Meadows. David Mackenzie Boyle, hooded by Professor Warren Hardy. Alexander Jonathan Fuge, hooded by Professor Alexander Leonessa. Connor William Heron, hooded by Professor Alexander Leonessa. Thruvin Rakeshbai Jasolia, hooded by Professors Constant Untaroyu and Alexandrina Untaroyu. Ananth Jonavitula, hooded by Professor Dylan Losey. Jimmy Joel Kaindu, hooded by Professor Jonathan Boreko. Venkata Yashavsvi Lola, hooded by Professor Jonathan Boreko. Anshul Abhijit Nayak, hooded by Professor Dylan Losey. Amy Marie Cortaro, hooded by Professor Eric Comendera. Piyush Raj, hooded by Professor Joseph Meadows. Ahmed Salam, hooded by Professor Shima Shahab. Mustafa Adel Syed Ahmed, hooded by Professor Shima Shahab. Yogesh Vitarao Surkutwar, hooded by Professors Kostin Untaroyi and Corina Sandhu. Varsha S. Swami, hooded by Professors Corina Sandhu and Alba Hierro. Hannah Nicole White, hooded by Professor Corina Sandhu. Daniel Scott Whitehurst, hooded by Professor Kevin Kokersberger. Jiaxin Shi, hooded by Professor Shima Shahab. Da Han Shu, hooded by Professor Corina Sandhu. In mining engineering, Festus Ayinmi Anima, hooded by Professor Emily Sarver. From the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, in Counselor Education, Paul Michael DeLauter, hooded by Professors Matthew Fullen and Laura Welfare. Kendall Brianne Holloway, hooded by Professors Matthew Fullen and Laura Welfare. Brandy Leigh Smith, hooded by Professors Laura Welfare and Nancy Bodenhorn. In curriculum and instruction, Kamla Suleiman Al-Amri, hooded by Professors Glenn Holmes and Alicia Johnson. Amal Hamdan Al-Johani, hooded by Professors Peter Doolittle and Aaron Bond. Douglas Asante, hooded by Professors Alicia Johnson and Barbara Lockie. Christina Elena Bell, hooded by Professor Trevor Stewart. Sarah Louise Evers, hooded by Professor David Hicks. Kelly Shireen Fleming, hooded by Professor Alicia Johnson. Kia Sarika Powers, hooded by Professors Peter Doolittle and Donna Fortune. Shane Michael Ryan, hooded by Professor Brian Kleiner. Anthony Oduro Senya, hooded by Professors Glenn Holmes and Barbara Lockie. In human development, Tiara Monet Fennell, hooded by Professor Pamela Teester. Khushbu Shailesh Kumar Patel, hooded by Professor Megan Dolman McNabb. Caitlin Jennifer Singer, hooded by Professor Benjamin Katz. In planning, governance, and globalization, Mohammed Abdurrahman Al-Barak, hooded by Professor Yang Zhang. Andrea Davila Saad, hooded by Professor Karen Kitchens. Sadhana Manthapuri, hooded by Professor Ralph Hall. Zuleikar Rondell Woods, hooded by Professor Brandy Faulkner. In public administration and public affairs, Elizabeth Emmert Arledge, hooded by Professor Sharon Mastracci. Todd Allen McDonald, hooded by Professor Bruce Penchik. In science and technology studies, Pratyusha Pranab Kiran, hooded by Professor Daniel Breslau. In social, political, ethical, and cultural thought, Sabrina Kylie Harris, hooded by Professor Laura Zanotti. Vasilia Masarovich, hooded by Professor Vinod Venkatesh. In sociology, Sarah Adol, hooded by Professor Ashley Reichelman. Jacob Elijah Robinson, hooded by Professor Ashley Reichelman. From the College of Natural Resources, in Fisheries and Wildlife, Emily Noel Sincular, hooded by Professor Ashley Dayer. In forestry, Fa Yu Chong, hooded by Professor Kelly Coburn. Stephanie Ann Dustin, hooded by Professor Brian Badgley. Allison Leigh Ritz, hooded by Professors Valerie Thomas and Randolph Wynn. From the College of Science, in Biological Sciences, Zachary Robert Baker, hooded by Professor Brian Su. Nicholas Cornelis Baudouin, hooded by Professor Daniela Simini. Matthew Ryan Bloomfield, hooded by Professor Daniela Simini. Sukhman Preet Kaur, hooded by Professors Dorothea Toll and James Westwood. Sarah Teamer Richards, hooded by Professor Dana Hawley. Safora Salar, hooded by Professor Florian Schubach. Amber Nicole Wendler, hooded by Professor Jeff Walters. In chemistry, Michaela Christian Boyanich, hooded by Professor John Morris. Joseph Edward Quinlan III, hooded by Professor Pablo Sobrado. Veera Venkata Shravan Uppala, hooded by Professor Louis Madsen. Dawei Ji Xia, hooded by Professor Feng Lin. Zhen Grey Shu, hooded by Professor Feng Lin, and of course, Ali. Zhizhe Yang, hooded by Professor Feng Lin. Zhu Xin Zhang, hooded by Professor Feng Lin. In geosciences, Faisal Torbu Adams, hooded by Professor Frederick Michel. Ethan William Conley, hooded by Professor Ryan Pollier. Erica Robin Goldsmith, hooded by Professor Michelle Stocker. Mohammed Korami, hooded by Professor Manucher Shirzai. Lars W. Kern, hooded by Professor Ryan Pollier. Asenat Quagalakwe, hooded by Professor Sarah Stamps. Intabilas Simon Dowd Masangulwa, hooded by Professor Sarah Stamps. Jack R. Stack, hooded by Professor Michelle Stocker. Karen Alexandra Williams, hooded by Professor Sarah Stamps. In mathematics, Kiana Monet Murphy, hooded by Professor Stanka Siupe. In neuroscience, Morgan Brianna Patrick, hooded by Professor Timothy Jerome. In physics, Chinmay Katke, hooded by Professor Nadir Kaplan. Teshani Omantika Lihiniya Kumaraji, hooded by Professor Rana Ashkar. Varun Mathur, hooded by Professor Jonathan Link. Keegan H. Walkup, hooded by Professor Jonathan Link. In psychology, Ya Yun Chen, hooded by Professor Tai Ho Lee. In statistics, Han Chen, hooded by Professor Xin Wei Deng. Ching Guo, hooded by Professor Xin Wei Deng. Jia Yi Lian, hooded by Professor Chin Wei Deng. Shuang Zhu, hooded by Professor Marco Ferreira. From the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine, in Biomedical and Veterinary Sciences, Josefa Karina Garcia Mora, hooded by Professor Craig Daniel. Morgan Vandergiesen, hooded by Professor Kylene Kane Hall. In interdisciplinary doctoral degrees in genetics, bioinformatics, and computational biology, Christian Heriakasuma, hooded by Professor Biswarup Mukhopadhyay. Paru Sharma, hooded by Professor Boris Vinitzer. Gabrielle Lee Smith, hooded by Professor Cassidy Rist. In macromolecular science and engineering, Tianran Chen, hooded by Professor Bill Huckle. Ryan A. Gray, hooded by Professor Sean O'Keefe. In translational biology, medicine, and health, Hana Habib Mohammed Abdelazim, hooded by Professor John Chappell. Catherine Elise Burgess, hooded by Professor Kevin Lammers. Jonathan David Joyce, hooded by Professor Andrea Bertke. Megan Sadovi, hooded by Professor Stephen Pausing. Caitlin Stebbins, hooded by Professor Shannon Ferris. Emily Terrell, hooded by Professor Netta Gurari. Receiving the Doctor of Education from the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies, Danielle E. Colucci, hooded by Professors Jody Brinkman and Charles Lowry. Megan Ray Corneliu, hooded by Professor Charles Lowry. Ashley Hart Fayborg, hooded by Professor Charles Lowry. Alvaro Marcel Flores, hooded by Professor Jody Brinkman. Fallon Elizabeth Graham, hooded by Professor Carol Cash. Heather Victoria Riganti, hooded by Professor Charles Lowry. Leanna Blake Rippey, hooded by Professor Charles Lowry. Bobby Terrell Shockley, hooded by Professor Carol Cash. In higher education, Vanessa Roccolo, hooded by Professor Chase Catalano and Claire Robbins. In engineering mechanics, Behzad Hamedi, hooded by Professor Corina Sandhu. In biological sciences, Holland Claire Franklin, hooded by Professor Brian Su. In biochemistry, Haley M. Mitchell, hooded by Professor Justin Lemku. In educational leadership and policy studies, Nuf Al-Homoud, hooded by Professor Carol Cash. In engineering mechanics, Justin Robert Michael Dubik, hooded by Professor Rafaela De Vita. In forestry, Julia Ann DeFeo, hooded by Professor Adam Coates. In computer science and applications, Redwan Khan, hooded by Professor Bill Huckle. In agriculture and extension education, Kendrick Leroy Spencer, hooded by Professor Hannah Scherer. In human development, Meredith Atanasio, hooded by Professor Cindy Smith. In biomedical and veterinary sciences, Charlotte Nyblade, hooded by Professor Lei Juan Yuan. In mechanical engineering, Sohail Habibian, hooded by Professor Dylan Losey. In civil engineering, Zhu Yao Zhang, hooded by Professor Bill Huckle. In biological systems engineering, Ya Wen He, hooded by Professor Anna Dorajtat. That's it.
Please join me in offering our congratulations to all of the PhD graduates. Will all the candidates for interdisciplinary master's degrees please rise? President Sands, I have the honor to present these candidates for master's degrees.
With the power vested in me by the Board of Visitors and the Commonwealth of Virginia, and upon recommendation of the faculty, I confer upon you the master's degrees to which you are entitled, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertaining thereto.
Please be seated. Will the marshals please escort the candidates for master's degrees to the stage? At this time, Dr. Merola will read the names of the master's degrees recipients.
John Clifford Ferguson. Roberto Londano Echeverri. Rahel G. Ejugu. Charles W. Fields III. Victoria Fraser Ratcliffe. Arthur Joseph Hollett IV. Derek S. Johnson. Jacob Ross Doan. Jack David Meredith. Tyler Matthew Mix. Jimmy Chong Kun Liang. Essence Renee Henderson. Saloni Pari Muna. Marshall Anthony Craig. Juan Diego Sali Galarza. Patrick Beach. Joseph Ronald Meldrum. Terry Erie. Tri Min Le. Jenna Marie Garrich. Michael Cheney. Joel Stephen Booker. Kathleen Rose Marshalko. Now can I go? Are you sure? Nobody else?
Please join me in offering congratulations to all of our graduates.
A special thanks to Dr. Marola as reader of the names, to the faculty and staff ushers and marshals, to Aaron Krug, and to conductor Jay Crone and the Virginia Tech Brass Ensemble for their part in this afternoon's ceremony. Now please stand until the stage party has recessed. With the recessional, our ceremony will be concluded. Thank you for joining us, and once again, congratulations, graduates.